It's very insightful to know the amount of work planning that goes on for the small communities. We usually focus a lot of the strategic plans, they focus on the bigger cities, whereas there's less focus on the small communities. And that's why it is really interesting to hear about your work. I have some questions actually, very related to your work and experience. One thing it's really interesting to see the level of interest from the political leaders, right? Because like you said, you would expect that they would be more supportive of the strategic planning process. So, any thoughts on why they seem to not be that favorable towards, at least in the beginning?
Yeah, I think part of it, Aroon, really is, and if we have any elected officials on the call, I apologize. I think they believe that they know what's best, that they know what they were elected, their platform that they were elected on, and they know how to get things done. And so I don't think that there's a lot of I don't think that elected officials think there's a need for this type of process. They're elected, they know what needs to be done, just get it done. Um, so that's been my experience. I think the other thing is when elected officials hear strategic planning, and I know when I was in local government, this was my board of supervisors. Oh, that's going to be really expensive. We don't need to do that. I mean, it's just that whole thing of we've got to hire some high price consultant to be able to do this, and we don't have the money for it. We can spend it on other things. So I think that's also part of the resistance as well,
Thank you,
especially
thank
in
you.
small communities. Yep.
Thank you, Stephanie. So I want to ask you about the stakeholders. How do you identify them? I mean, I know there's a lot of these methods that we use, but what do you think is the most effective way to identify stakeholders in the community?
Yep. So I have seen number one, the first contact is going to be with the local government manager, right? They're going to be the one that's going to facilitate this project. They're going to sell it to their council, their governing body. So it's really the manager starting with them. I have had managers say we want to do a survey. I have had managers say, we really want to focus on the business community. So can you put in some time with the Chamber of Commerce? And I think when um, I have engaged with communities that have said, will you come and do a kickoff meeting with our council so they understand what they're doing and you can get some feedback? And I've had council say, we really want to get A, B, and C involved. Like anything else, it's dependent on the community, but I think you have to speak with the manager first to say, how do you want to kind of move this forward? And what is your governing body expectations? That's really the question. So it just depends. It just depends.
Yeah, that's a good point. The governing body expectations are also very important because, for example, the private sector businesses, you want them also to be involved, right? And so we need to, I mean, you want to make sure that they're not left out in the process. And maybe if there are any academic institutions, schools, or colleges, they also can contribute a lot in the process. So this is good. With the actual process, Stephanie, I want to ask, we talk a lot about the SWOT analysis, right? Are there other variations of the SWOT analysis? I know in business organizations, there's a lot of variations, but in public organizations and cities and communities, primarily the SWOT is only used. But how do you see that?
I think, based on the localities that I work with, either they're not doing a SWOT analysis or they only know a SWOT analysis. And so with elected officials, I'm not trying to throw something new at them. I'm trying to, just make sure they're comfortable with the process. The SWOT tends to be a pretty good way to get feedback from the council members or the board of supervisors. I called it strengths, weaknesses, and challenges, opportunities and challenges in that manager's manual, but I think anything that you can do to get the perspective of council on what are some things that we do really well, what are some things that are challenges, or what are some things that are really potentially going to hurt our community. That any kind of sort of activity like that is great. I don't know any other than the SWOT analysis.
Thank you, Stephanie. We have a question from the audience from Irwin, who said that many strategies fail because actual accountability for results is weak or missing. So, how to help leadership hold others to accountability for their parts of the plan? Good question, Irwin.
That's a great question. So, I think um, I want to think about the right way to say this so I don't confuse you. If the elected officials are asking for the strategic plan, when I'm working with those elected officials, I am telling them this is how, not this directly, but I'm saying to them, this is how you hold your manager accountable. And if you're holding your manager accountable, they're holding their department heads accountable. Remember, we're talking about local government. So I think you're exactly right. If they have this plan, they being the elected officials, and now can understand that this is the document you're telling your manager, this is what we want done. You're the policy implementer, we're the policy makers. That is the accountability piece. And I I just feel like if you have that plan and the elected officials understand that concept that there's more accountability as a result.
Thank you, Stephanie. So Stephanie, one question related to this, the one of the last slides among the last slides that you showed, updating the plan, right? You said at least like 27, a quarter of the respondents, they said that they update the plan every year. So updating a plan, how would you define that? Like what is involved in this updating the plan?
Yep. So let me say this. There's a difference between a complete rewrite of a strategic plan and updating the plan. And that may have been a flaw in my question in my survey. First of all, you should not be redoing a strategic plan every year. What you should be doing is looking at the goals and strategies. And as you're completing those strategies, which are the action items, which are what you've told the manager, this is what I want you to do. As those things get completed, we want to update the goals and the strategies. Okay, we've done this. Now what? We've done that. Now what? And so, in my mind, there is a difference between a complete override of a strategic plan and basically updating based on projects being completed. That complete rewrite should probably be every 3 to 5 years because everything changes. Technology, people, your communities, all that sort of thing. So I hope I clarified the difference between that complete rewrite and just updating the action items that we had in place.
No, that's no. This is very helpful. Thank you, Stephanie. It's actually quite impressive to see, the updates, annual updates and updates every 2 3 years. So that is really helpful to see that. So I have another question from the audience. So Philip's question is, where you have a town that has been historically dependent on one employer, industry, how can you convince elected officials about the need to be bold and see the need to diversify the economic base through the development of a strategic plan? Good question. And he's also asking, he's also mentioned that you would think this would be an obvious need, but apparently not. So,
It's an excellent question. And you all may chuckle when I say this. A strategic plan is not what you need when it comes to economic development. I have done, I have been working in the strategic plan space for quite a while. And when I'm working with these elected officials, they are trying to solve economic development problems in the midst of a non-economic development plan. And I said this in January to the town I was working with. Do you all have an economic development strategic plan? They were like, oh yeah. I'm like, I don't think you do. I highly recommend local governments consider an economic development strategic plan. You can call it working plan, community plan, whatever you want to do. Because what's happening is a strategic plan is a broad look at the community overall, right? And we're setting up all these strategies and all these goals. And you can have a goal for economic development all day long with little tiny things. Yes, this is what we want to do in the next 3 to 5 years. But the question I'm hearing from my local governments is we don't have an economic development strategy. We don't know what we want our downtown to be. We don't know any of these things and this clear vision on what economic development is in our local government. And that's different than having a goal for economic development and some quick kind of action items. And so when that question about when a town has been dependent on one industry or employer, how do you convince elected officials? What you need to tell them is you need an economic development vision for this community. What is it that you want to recruit? If you've got one industry, maybe you have a downtown, maybe you have a main street. What do you want these things to look like? Because that is just not one goal and 5 or 6 strategies. That is an overarching plan and vision for economic development in your community. So I would love to say, oh, a strategic plan will solve that. I am finding it does not. You have to have a separate kind of uh, thought process when it comes to economic development. Maybe that's what I'll start doing next is economic development plans.
Thank you, Stephanie. I was going to ask you that actually. Have you also done economic development?
have not. I have not. But what I have said to a lot of folks is, do y'all have an economic development vision and plan? Y'all need that. And I haven't done them yet. No one has said, will you do that for us? So,
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. That is great. Another question I want to ask you is, from the presentation is the performance measurement, right? I mean, we talk about performance measurement, strategic planning. And we've always seen in many cases it's dealt separately. That linkage, is not really happening. How do you see that?
yep, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I probably should amend this. Keep in mind, I am working with small communities, 20,000 and below. Most of the time, they're 10,000 and below. You saw my example, 2,000 citizens. I do not recommend performance measures as a part of the strategic plan for these small communities. What I tell them, and this is in the manual, is look, you don't have the time or the staff to be able to manage and count pieces, parts, and everything else for workload and outcomes and that sort of thing. What I want you to do is think about the normal questions that your council asks you on an annual basis: tax rate, number of police officers, number of whatever. Figure out what your benchmark locality list is and have that updated once a year and see how you compare. And in that manual, I talk about performance measures. I personally, based on my expertise, I think it's different. I think it's different for a small community. You don't have 50 people in the data section of the fire department. You've just kind of got to do it ad hoc.
Thank you, Stephanie. That's a good point, actually. That's very important because you have to really think about your the customer, the client. Small communities. It's really sometimes you cannot really put everything together and put the pressure on them. So this is really good. I have the next question from the audience. Sukumar's question is: do you see any difference between the master plan and the strategic plan? Is there any preference for the small cities for one? This is a good question also because I'm actually involved, in the master plan of my town too. So yes, I would love to hear from you, Stephanie. So
Yep. Absolutely, two different things. So when we think about a master plan or a comprehensive plan, you are thinking about the physical development of a community, period. And that's what it's focused on. Where are you going to put a road? Where are you going to put a public school? You know, all those kinds of things. It is the physical development. A strategic plan is the overall, think about the overall vision for the community. That master plan or the goals in the comprehensive plan, that's what we call it in Virginia, may be intertwined in the strategic plan, but we are looking at everything, not just the physical attributes of a community, but is you what you'll find is strategic plans will talk about the employees and the organization. It'll talk about funding and keeping the budget, in line, and we want to reduce taxes might be a strategy. It is looking at the overall community and the vision for the community, holistically, where a comprehensive plan or a master plan is looking at it from a physical perspective. Physical perspective. You need both, quite frankly. I think you need both.
Yeah. No, this is a good point. And just to, wanted to clarify, does one be a part of the other, or I mean, these are done separately?
I
I've
think they're
seen,
done
yeah.
separately. That's how we in Virginia we do them separately. Two totally different focuses. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Aroon.
Oh, no, no, because the town that I'm involved in is involved in this comprehensive plan, but strategic planning is part of that, right? So that's why. So, but yeah, it can. That's a good point to note. So, another question I have is actually, we'll go to one of the. Now, I wanted to come to this question of implementation, but before that, let's go to the next audience question. Laura's question is: I have used forecast for strategic planning. Did you find that the cities that have a strategic plan use a strategic plan program? Do you have a recommendation that you have found works best?
Laura, based on the folks that I'm working with here in Virginia, they do not use any kind of strategic plan software, so I don't have a recommendation. But remember, it's just the folks that I'm working with. We're basically using Word and Excel to manage these things. And I'm not kidding. So I don't have a recommendation, but I appreciate you bringing it up because I think I'll go check it out.
Thank you, Stephanie. I want this question about implementation, right? I mean, you developing a strategic plan, and you're presenting it to the town, and the implementation. I mean, is there any steps for implementation, plan for implementation? How, and of course, after that, it just comes out in different ways, right? Depending upon the actions taken by the towns and the small communities. So how do you give them any steps for implementation? I've actually seen some implementation plans too, right? So how do you see that?
So, I- um, the first thing I do is tell the governing body, once I've completed my work, you need to adopt this plan, because if they don't adopt it, then it's not official action of council. And I think it carries more weight when they do that. So they'll adopt that plan. In terms of implementation, that falls to the manager and the employees in the local government organization. So the manager has to be able to take that plan and say, okay, here's what we need to do over the next year or the next 6 months or whatever it is. That I think about the plan as a policy document. The council is going to approve that policy. It's up to the manager and the staff to implement that policy. Great question.
That's a good question, good point, Stephanie. Yeah, they have to really officially adopt the plan. Yeah. So I have one question. You're also an academic. So how do you see that? How do you see the gap in practice and teaching on strategic planning and strategic management? How do you see universities, especially MPA programs, addressing this need for these skills in strategic planning among our students?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So, I do teach in our MPA program, and I think we do a great job. And let me finish this before I keep patting myself on the back. I think we do a really good job of bringing up the concept of strategic plan, from a theoretical perspective in the classroom, right? We can read about strategic plans all the time. I think what this work through ICMA does is it takes it to that practice level. So we actually use this document in the classes. And then what I find is that as I go and do outreach and service with these small communities, I bring these plans back into the classroom. So it's this whole loop that I'm kind of closing for our students. Here's what the academic world says about strategic planning. Here's kind of this is how you do it, based on my manual, and then here's how it went, and be able to bring these great rich stories of communities in Virginia where some of my students live, and they get to learn about their community. So it's kind of either a circle or a triangle, however you want to look at it, or a Venn diagram, where you have the academic piece, you have the practice piece that you're demonstrating, and then bringing those real world examples into the classroom.
Thank you, Stephanie. I really enjoyed listening to your experience, to all your suggestions, and and this was also a very engaging session. We had wonderful questions from the audience.